right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to look at three topics in tonight's lecture: the English Civil War, the restoration of the monarchy, and the Glorious Revolution. So in order to do that, we're going to go back a little bit and take a look at the history, what's taking place in England at this point in time. So we know, hopefully from our reading, that James I is going to be the first of the Stuart dynasty. Remember, he takes over for Elizabeth because Elizabeth did not have any heirs. She never married, so she never had any children that were going to replace her when she died. So her next of kin would have been James I, but that ends the Tudor dynasty. The Tudor dynasty was with Henry VIII. Now, James I had a difficult relationship, shall we say, with the Parliament in particular, because he very much viewed himself as divinely appointed, that he was there because God wanted him to be there. So I've given you two quotes that are here that help defend that point. He was a firm believer in the divine right of kings. Now, Charles I, who is going to take over for James in 1625, he faces a lot of challenges. First of all, we have a difficult relationship now with Parliament. In addition, he needs money to fight a lot of wars, many of which he's causing, and the Parliament doesn't want to give him that money. So instead of trying to compromise or work with Parliament, he just dissolves it. He gets rid of it. And that's going to be a huge problem for him. It's certainly not going to be good for his reputation and for his relationship with the people of England. But in 1628, he finds himself in a very desperate situation where he really needs this money. And so he's forced to call Parliament, and Parliament makes him sign what they call the Petition of Rights. You're going to see this as POR in the coming slides. Now, this was a document that granted certain rights to citizens, and things like that I've listed here. The king could not imprison people without just cause. He couldn't just raise taxes without Parliament's consent, so on and so forth. You might recall that some of these things were already mentioned or discussed in the Magna Carta. So this is really just a continuation of the Magna Carta, reaffirming some of its primary purposes, its primary laws for the land. After the Petition of Rights, Charles signs it, and then he just doesn't follow it, which again is problematic. He agrees to this document, he agrees to this set of laws, but if he actually followed them, if he actually did this, it would be proof that he is not in full control of his country, and he is trying desperately to establish absolute power for himself. So he would be admitting that the law was more powerful than him, and that certainly was not what he wanted to do. So again, he refuses to call Parliament, taxes the people incredibly heavily, and as a result, makes a lot of enemies. And he finds himself again in another conflict, another issue that he's in a sense causing. He tries to force the Scots to become Anglican, to accept the Anglican prayer book, and of course they don't want to do that, and so they threaten to invade England. Once again now, Charles needs money. He needs money to raise an army to fight the Scots. England does have an army, but it's also been kind of bogged down in other wars, particularly in Ireland at this point in time, where they're trying to again force them to give up their Catholic faith and become Protestant. So he needs more money to increase the size of his army and supply it. But again, the only way he can really get that money is by calling Parliament, and Parliament had not been called for 11 years at that point in time. Clearly, that is not something that the Parliament is going to be thrilled to hear, that the king now needs us, so we're going to be called, and he wants money from us. So they do meet. This is referred to as the Long Parliament, and the Parliament does try to use this as an opportunity to pass various laws that would limit his power. And of course, he is not going to accept that. You can see how this conflict is just going back and forth and back and forth. Eventually, he actually tries to arrest several leaders of the Parliament, and they escape. But this, again, is just going to continue to damage his relationship. So badly, it gets to the point where he has to leave. He has to leave London, flee to northern England to try to raise an army, now not against the Scots, but against his own people. Right? And this is when the English Civil War begins. So, of course, there are always two sides to a civil war. You had the Royalists, they were also known as the Cavaliers, and these were individuals who were loyal to the king. The Roundheads, the other side, were actually Puritans. A lot of these individuals were Puritans who were very avid, strong supporters of the Parliament. There were others as well who opposed the monarchy, but for the most part, these were considered Puritans. And Puritans are very conservative Protestants. In a way, they almost come out of more of a Calvinist ideology or approach to Protestantism. Very different from the Anglican Church, as we know, because the Anglican Church had been very much based off of Catholic teachings and traditions. Now, no side wins for the first few years, but an individual, a man by the name of Oliver Cromwell, he creates what's called this new model army. And this is an army that is incredibly well disciplined, based off of Puritan values. Things like merit, promotions are based on merit as opposed to wealth and class. There were very strict ethical and moral codes. So this was a very organized, unified army that Oliver Cromwell then led. And eventually, they do beat the Cavaliers, they do defeat the Royalist forces, and they defeat the monarchy. Right, now, if we just take a moment, you could pause this video and just take a look at the progression of gains by the Roundheads, the beginning of the Civil War to the end of the Civil War. Just take a moment to see how the Roundheads gain control of most of England. Right, now, something that is really very revolutionary at this point, very extreme, is that the end result of the Civil War is the end of the monarchy, at least temporarily. The Parliament actually kills, they execute Charles I on the grounds of treason. He's beheaded in January of 1649, and this was very scary for a lot of monarchs in Europe, because if England could be killed by his people, that means that all of the monarchs could possibly be vulnerable. And that was very scary to the rest of Europe at this point in time, and really a very new idea that this could actually take place, that people would actually rebel to this point and execute their king. Right? And so what replaces the monarchy is Cromwell. And Cromwell tries to establish a form of a republic, but really what he creates is what is called, what I like to call anyway, more of a military dictatorship. He becomes the Lord Protector, really a dictator, and he rules with this iron fist. He enforces a lot of Puritan ideology. He hates the Catholics, really wants to eliminate Catholicism. His rule is nowhere near what a republic should have been like, and the people resent him for that. So that results eventually in an end to this republic, so to speak, an end to Cromwell's rule. His son did take over, but he could not keep his power because the people again wanted a king. So eventually in 1660, Parliament will ask Charles II to come back and be king. Now, Charles II was Charles I's son, and this is what we call the restoration of the monarchy. Right? And this restoration is very important to understand because it's acknowledging that they do not want a pure form of a republic. We know that England has a monarchy today. So this monarchy was incredibly important to the people, so much so that they brought it back. Now, they did expect Charles to work with them. And that results in a lot of compromise on the part of Charles II. He is, again, like I said, Charles I's oldest son. He did support Catholics, and at the same time, he did believe in absolute monarchy, but he knew how to play the game. He knew how to work with Parliament, and that was really what was most important at this point in time. All right, so when we say he knew how to work with Parliament, excuse me, what we're talking about is being the head of the Church of England, making sure that he was going to support the Protestant Reformation that took place in England, that he is going to also, though, try to protect Catholics, because his brother James II was actually Catholic. You might wonder how that happened. Charles I was married to a Catholic woman. She was from Spain. And so one son ended up being Protestant, one son ended up being Catholic. The Parliament reacted by passing what's called the Test Act, and that banned all Catholics from political jobs, from certain political jobs, and that protected the Parliament from a Catholic influence. Now, Charles obviously will die in 1685. He does pass away, and so he is going to be replaced by his brother, James II. And James II really had very little intention of continuing in his brother's footsteps. Charles II, like I said, learned from his father's mistakes. He learned to compromise and work with Parliament. James II wanted a strict, absolute monarchy. And so we have here just a few quotes, things that he believed in, but most importantly, he was a supporter of the divine right of kings. He did not want to compromise. He did not want to work with Parliament, and he was going to oppose all who opposed him. He was going to crush that. So as a result, Parliament put their foot down rather quickly, and they appointed or asked William of Orange and Queen Mary to take the throne. So what does this mean? This is referred to as the Glorious Revolution. This Glorious Revolution is a bloodless revolution. That means there's no civil war here, there's no major conflict. It's actually a rather peaceful revolution, an easy change, so to speak. Parliament does not want James in power, so he asks James's daughter Mary and her husband to rule England. They have to, if they want this power, they have to obey Parliament's wishes. They have to work with Parliament. And once they accept that compromise, that agreement, James II actually flees, which was kind of smart on his part. He saw that his father was executed for not working with Parliament, and he also saw that Parliament did have a lot of authority, and so he probably feared for his life at this point in time, and instead of fighting them, he recognized that this was the best course of action. And so what that means now is that this idea of the divine right to rule is now dead. There is no more divine right of kings in England. And so William and Mary will sign what's called the English Bill of Rights, and this is a sign of their support. This signals their support. So if you want to take a moment to just pause the video, I've given you a list of things that the English Bill of Rights does, what it establishes in England. And most importantly, what it is doing, it is creating a constitutional monarchy. A monarchy that is there, it is hereditary, but it must follow this written set of laws. So just pause this video for a moment, take a look at what's written here to get an idea of how this document limits the power of the king. Right. And now that England is a limited monarchy, that means that there really is no absolute monarch in England. Remember, an absolute monarch is a monarch who has complete authority over the government and the lives of the people. A constitutional or a limited monarchy is one that whose power, is limited by a constitution or a legislative body. And in this particular case, it's going to be both. England has a constitution and their parliament, their legislative body. And if you can see here, I like this illustration. You can pause the video again and take a look. This is just the seesaw effect, the power that's constantly shifting in England between the king and the parliament. So you could take a look at this illustration, which I think is rather clever. In addition, you have to understand the difference between France and England. You remember that France never had a written constitution or a strong representative body. They had the Estates General, but it was completely in the control of the king. Whereas in England, the parliament that was created by the nobility, the people had control over it. So you can see, or hopefully you can see, why it succeeds, absolutism succeeds in France, but fails in England.